Hey guys, it's Eric with episode 2 of Tales from the Exercise Mat. I was just doing a little modified plank action on the elbows and the toes. Well, back in the day, the story goes about early 1980s, 1981-ish, 82, something like that. I was in my karate school testing for like one of my early belts, yellow or orange belt, one of those early belts in my Kempo karate school. And one of the tests, one of the things in the belt test we had to do was a thing called bows and toes. So basically all it was a modified plank on your elbows. But they didn't call it a plank back then. There wasn't any talk about plank. They just called it bows and toes. And one of the things they did, they had this box. They had this like box that had these two holders at the end, and they put a samurai sword with the blade facing up, and they slid it underneath you, right? So you're holding this plank, and there's a sword underneath your belly. So if you fall down, you fall on the sword. Now I was only like 11 years old at the time, right? So, man, that kind of scared me, right? I was like, dang, I got this big sword under my belly. If I fall, I'm going to get cut in half, right? So, anyway, it was a rubber sword. I didn't know that at the time. And it's kind of messed up when you think about it. I thought it was a real sword, And, but I didn't know any better. I was just like 11 or 12. And, man, so I held that plank, I held it for as long as the karate instructor said. And then, and then they'd slide the sword out and say you could get down. And I was like, wow, So I went on to get my belt and progressed on. Ended up teaching and becoming one of the instructors there at that school. And I basically, did all kinds of training there. That was, we just thought it was normal stuff. But, nowadays you look back and, man, they got all these terms for everything. We were doing core training. Nobody talked about core training. We were doing all these, plank positions, all these different variations of planks and all this different stuff, And they had different names for it back then, but nobody said core training or any of that stuff. And, we would do our flexibility and stretching training back in the day when I could do splits and kick straight up and stuff. We were doing PNF stretching, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation stretching, right? But back in the day, it was just stretching. You held all these poses and you applied pressure and your partner held it and all these different kicks, and we were doing PNF stretching, right? But nobody, had any terminology back then. And now it's all cool, They even got courses. I even took a course in PNF stretching. And so we were doing core training, we were doing PNF stretching, we were doing yoga, right? But nobody called it yoga. They just called it, stretching. And so we're doing all this stuff. And, of course, we trained barefoot, and we wore kung fu shoes and wrestling shoes, So we were doing minimalist shoe training, and barefoot training, which is all a thing now. And, we were doing all sorts of stuff like that. And none of that stuff, when I learned about it, I was like, oh, yeah, I know what that is. It's just got a different name. So all these people nowadays see these new programs come out, and they got all these new terms and courses and certifications. But that stuff isn't new. There's really nothing in the last 35 years I've seen that's been new, And, we were doing strength training, we were doing strength and conditioning, we were doing what you'd consider metabolic conditioning, Metcon, and nobody called it that back then, They called it circuit training or something like that. They had these names, but none of this stuff is new. It's like all they've done is like reinvent old stuff and put flashy labels on it and given it a cool name and repackaged it as like the new craze, Like we used to do, we used to have to get into different stances, like a modified horse stance, which is basically a parallel squat, bodyweight squat, but they'd have us hold different objects, right? So we were doing like isometric contraction, static holds in the horse stance, down to parallel, and we were holding stuff like sandbags and all these different objects, weighted poles, And now, sandbag training, we used to carry sandbags and do all kind of drills with sandbags and ropes. And man, now it's all cool, now it's all a thing. But back in the day, it wasn't. It was just regular training, and we did that stuff all the time. We went out and ran, we did sprints. We did just about every form of training, we had weights. And even, like 35, 36 years ago, I was working out on, the Total Gym, the thing that like Chuck Norris advertised for 1,000 years, right? And I used that thing back in the early 80s, and it was actually like, pretty cool. But it wasn't, you see the ads for it now on these paid infomercials and stuff, and you're like, oh, this new thing, but that thing's been around for decades. And it actually, if you use it correctly, you could actually do some serious training on it. So, exercise bikes and all these different air cycles and things, we used all of that stuff, and none of it's new. That's the point, right? So training has evolved, like there's a lot more science behind it, a lot of, like I definitely know the why much better now than I did back then when I was 11 and 12. But I was doing the same stuff basically that I do today, except I know more about it, how it works, why it works, and I knew the new, all the terminology and the scientific terminology behind the stuff, like epoch and stuff like that. But, the stuff worked back then, and we didn't know why, right? We just knew it worked. And, but the funny thing is like how over the decades, different things like kettlebells, I took my first kettlebell class in like 1997, and nobody even knew what kettlebells were. And there wasn't any certifications. It was just, I went to 2 weekend kettlebell seminars, and we did all kinds of craziness, and it was really hard, good training. And I learned all the basic kettlebell stuff, and man, but now it's all cool, and they got all these certifications, and I wish I could go back in time and get certificates for all that stuff that I did, because man, now it's all, everybody's got a certification and a course, but none of this stuff is new. It's all based on stuff that's been around for a long, long time. And the big thing is like all these different forms of training are good, but you really need to learn the why. That's really the secret to understanding how to integrate all these different types of training. Any type of physical training is good for you, but you got to know how to use it and why, what its purpose, the task and purpose behind the exercise is, or the type of training, the modality of training, right? If you're using different objects. And, a lot of people use different training, like an example, long distance running for weight loss and fat loss. Totally, the most probably inefficient, long time wasting method of fat loss training there is. But, people do it, right? Now running, there's a variety. If you're training for a distance run, a lot of people think like the Couch to 5K is a good weight loss program. But man, talk about inefficient, right? Not only do I think the Couch to 5K program is inefficient, there's a zillion ways to get better at doing stuff that doesn't take like 6 or 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever these things are. There's so many different ways. But one of the things that we always used to do was sprints. And sprints throughout my life have been, like I said, I didn't know why, but they always worked. They got me faster. I got more endurance quicker. My long distance runs got better. My medium distance, my short distance, everything got better, and it helped me overall. And to this day, sprinting is still considered one of the most effective tools, especially for like weight loss and fat loss when you're talking about time efficiency. And but the thing is, back in the day, all this type of training existed, and the stuff is not new, and it's been around for dozens and dozens of years. But now there's so much more science behind it. Now you can really learn, and I've learned so much, and now I understand all the stuff, why I was doing things 35 years ago. So it's kind of interesting to see, but the bows and toes, we were doing planks back in the early 80s with swords underneath our bellies and stuff, and it was core training, right? We were doing all types of core training, and now it's all, you got the plank, modified planks, reverse planks, side planks, this plank, that plank. You get all kinds of stuff, right? All these core training, different workouts and stuff. But back in the day, we used to do all kind of, hip extensions and glute raises and all this stuff. And it was all to develop more power in your kicks and stuff to be a better fighter. Because originally, I started training in fitness to enhance my fighting skills. Because I started, my journey began in martial arts. I spent many a year in a dojo, and we were doing all this stuff. And now it's all cool guy stuff. It's all got certifications, and it's all got, labels and names and science behind it and all these different courses and stuff. But it's been around for a long time. So just because something seems new doesn't necessarily mean it is. But the whole thing is you got to go out there and you got to learn, why are you doing it? Ask yourself this question. In your workouts, are you doing the most efficient exercise for whatever your goal is? If you're doing something and you're trying to attain a specific goal, are you doing the best form of training? Is there something better that could be more efficient and take less time and get you more results, than what you're doing? And the answer is probably yes, most of the time, and I figured out what worked through trial and error. 35 years, I tried a lot of stuff, and I figured out a lot of stuff that absolutely didn't work. Some stuff worked if you used it a certain way, and some stuff worked great. And so that's how I've based my training program that I've developed, based on, the results. Because the end state is you got to stay focused on, you're trying to achieve a goal. Your training has to produce results. And if something's taken you 6 months to make incremental or, slow gains, it's not the best form of training. So understand the why, educate yourself, learn about what you're doing, and try to